Shacknews is proud to present its Hall of Fame class of 2023. Every Shacknews Hall of Fame class celebrates the games, developers, companies, hardware, software, and more that have shaped our industry and our hobby. With that said, this is the Shacknews Hall of Fame class of 2023. In a year full of the classic titles, perhaps no game released in 1998 stands taller than The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. On the surface, it's the three-dimensional manifestation of a formula that some argue Nintendo perfected in 1992's A Link to the Past. Delve deeper, and you'll find the first rendition of Hyrule that felt like a living, breathing world. Nintendo made great strides in establishing conventions for 3D movement and interaction with 1996's Super Mario 64. Ocarina of Time builds on that foundation by establishing systems still in use in 3D games today. Z-targeting gave developers a way to let players target their attacks. Tapping Z also snapped the camera behind Link's shoulders, allowing players to quickly and easily focus on terrain, obstacles, and other actions in front of them. All of those features blend with a Hyrule that feels lived in, rather than video game fields teeming with targets and enemies. Every time the sun sets over Hyrule Field, candlelight blooms in windows, the drawbridge to Hyrule Castle raises, and townsfolk turn in for the day. In the morning, the drawbridge descends, candles are snuffed out, and the activities available to players changes. These and other manifestations conveyed a passage of time that immersed players in a setting and story, combined with one of gaming's most memorable soundtracks, exquisite dungeon design, and exhilarating boss battles. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time stands as one of gaming's finest achievements. Before Gordon Freeman's fateful commute to Black Mesa, first-person shooters were known as Doom clones, shooting galleries where players rarely had to think about anything beyond shooting anything that moved. Valve's debut title was nothing short of a paradigm shift that changed FPS titles by capitalizing on scripted events and grounded level design to create one of the most memorable spaces in video games. Half-Life's story takes a good 15 to 20 minutes to ramp up. That in itself was a major departure from the norm. Most FPS titles followed Doom's lead by throwing enemies at you, starting at the first or second screen. Half-Life's Calm Before the Storm made Zen's invasion of Black Mesa and the player's role in it a tension-filled spectacle. Scripted events, security guards being pulled into ducks by zombies, scientists fooling around with advanced weaponry, and blasting holes in walls added a sense of life to levels. Black Mesa's labs and corridors weren't a set of maps or levels. They were extension of a place that felt real. The game's final act transports Gordon to Zen. Even though the alien planet isn't nearly as memorable as the Black Mesa facility, the game's campaign full of creative weapons, devious enemy AI, and exploration-driven gameplay more than makes up for it. Valve's original holds up, but you should try Black Mesa, the 2020 remake, for an even more refined experience.
The Black Mesa Research Facility is an equal opportunity employer.
Hey, little buddy, want a ride?
Most players believed the Game Boy had run out of gas in 1998. Then Pikachu came along. While Pokemon had made waves in the East, its release in the West breathed new life into Nintendo's black and green handheld. The game's availability in two versions played a key part in Pokemon fever sweeping the globe. While there was plenty of overlap in the pocket monsters you could catch in Pokemon Red or Blue, the exclusivity of some critters encouraged players to dig around in the attic for their old Game Boy transfer cables and meet up with friends and strangers alike for trades. Besides trading, Pokemon presented a fun twist on party and turn-based JRPGs. Instead of playing a character in a party, you commanded groups of Pokemon in battle, using the inherent rock-paper-scissors system to decide which of your crew would go into battle and earn experience points to evolve into tougher, stronger types. Some players loved building their squads to defeat the gym masters in regions of the world, while others sunk hundreds of hours in the game's addictive collection systems. Looking back 25 years, it's easy to see why Pokemon Red and Blue kicked off the craze that has yet to lose steam.
That's where Pokemon for Game Boy is here. With both packs, you can catch them all.
Before Metal Gear Solid hit PlayStation in 1998, most Western players familiar with the franchise knew it had a short-lived pair of NES games, rife with typos, and often bewildering stealth mechanics. Metal Gear was much more popular in Japan, where director Hideo Kojima and his team designed absorbing top-down stealth games for Japanese PCs. The arrival of Metal Gear Solid transformed it into a cinematic tour de force in an era when cinematic was still associated quite negatively with grainy and poorly acted FMV-based CD-ROM games. More than its solid, stealth-focused gameplay, Metal Gear Solid is remembered for telling an engrossing story that expertly balanced fourth wall breaking absurdly and mature themes rooted in war, death, honor, and loyalty. Game systems such as Psycho Mantis, Metal Gear Solid's most memorable boss character, reading your mind by alluding to save data on your memory card and requiring you to reconnect your controller to Player 2's port to be defeated, pulled players further into Kojima's world of cloak and dagger espionage. Metal Gear Solid remains a landmark title that revealed the possibilities of cinematic storytelling in video games to millions of players, developers, and pundits. Although the original Unreal is known today more as the unveiling of Epic's profile engine of the same name, the original co-designed by Cliffy B. Basinski, was a major influence on single-player stories and multiplayer modes. Months ahead of Half-Life, Unreal took players on a journey through locations that felt real, rather than abstract maps littered with power-ups and monsters. The alternate fire mechanic made each weapon feel like two for the price of one. Some of those weapons introduced fun spins on archetypes, such as the flat cannon shotgun-like burst of pellets, combined with grenades, that didn't pack as much of a punch as a rocket launcher, but were still effective and less dangerous to the wielder in close quarters. On the multiplayer side, Epic hired Stephen Pulge, architect of the Reaper bot mod for Quake, to program AI opponents. Players could challenge a mix of box and human players on local networks or online, and the availability of bots, even in circumstances such as poor or no internet connections, gave everyone an opportunity to learn map layouts as well as surprisingly competitive matches against machines. Unreal Tournament was born from Unreal's experiments, and while the latter is the more popular, the original Unreal is rightfully remembered for immersive settings and well-designed deathmatch maps. Computer RPGs, CRPGs, were considered dead and buried for most of the 1990s. Compared to the shiny new genres like the first-person shooter, the CRPG's graphics were outmoded and their gameplay was slow and stodgy. Blizzard North's Diablo livened things up, but it was a hack-and-slash fest with little thought given to the story and character development. BioWare, a new studio shepherded by games publishing veterans with Interplay's Black Island RPG division, changed that with Baldur's Gate. If Diablo could be considered one side of the CRPG coin, fast, frantic, and delightfully mindless, Baldur's Gate is the other, tactile, rich in story, and driven as much by your choice of dialogue as your ability to blast monsters with spells or brain them with weapons. The game made excellent use of the Dungeons & Dragons license by presenting a familiar set of rules for tabletop aficionados, yet still accessible to newcomers who had never laid hands on a 20-sided die. Although pundits estimated low sales, Baldur's Gate sold through its initial printing of 50,000 copies in record time. Supply shortages forced manufacturers and retailers to scramble. Critics heaped praise upon it, with PC gamers saying it set new standards for every RPG that followed.
You are approaching Saturn.
Sega Saturn's second entry in the 32-bit era, behind the ill-conceived 32X attachment for Sega Genesis, had a dubious reception. The idea behind the 32X was to offer players a cheaper entry into the 32-bit era. This would buy Sega time to build and ship the Saturn, the console it hoped would compete with Nintendo's as-yet-announced successor to the Super NES, and Atari's Jaguar. Unfortunately, that ended up being one of the first of many missteps with the doomed Saturn. The 32X launched in November 1994 at roughly half the cost of the Saturn. When the 32X failed to get a foothold in the market over several months, Sega shuttered it and threw its weight behind Saturn. That likely frustrated developers who had committed resources to it, and the players who had received or purchased one over the holidays. Sega's blunders continued when it announced a launch date of September 2nd, 1995 for the Saturn, only to ship it to select retailers nearly 4 months early. This stunned and upset retailers that hadn't received a shipment, putting them at a disadvantage against competitors. Sega's reasoning was sound. Sony's PlayStation was taking ground from Nintendo and Sega, and the Saturn was viewed as the company's chance to catch up. That failed to pan out. PS1 and Nintendo 64 duked it out from 1996 for the next few years, leaving Sega a distant third. Despite the misfortune of Sega Saturn, bad decisions by Sega did not change the fact that Saturn hosted several excellent games. Virtua Fighter 1 and 2 were nearly arcade perfect. Nights into Dreams was a beautiful dreamlike platforming experience that offered an alternative to Sonic the Hedgehog's blink and you'll miss its speed. Sonic R was a kart racer that stood toe-to-toe with Mario Kart, and Panzer Dragoon Saga remains one of the best RPGs of its generation. Time and distance have been kind to the Saturn. Although its hardware couldn't match Sony and Nintendo's offerings, historians and collectors take every opportunity to extol the virtues of its software library. Street Fighter II revolutionized fighting games, gave arcades a new lease on life for a few more years, and had claimed its spot as one of the most influential video games of all time. Its soundtrack is just as legendary, and one theme stands above the rest. Guile's music is a perfect backdrop for his stage, a real American hero fighting in front of a jet with a bunch of his army buddies cheering him on. It's also the perfect backdrop to virtually any dramatic scene in any movie ever. And for cats doing cute things on the internet, and for bombshell paternity test reveals on Maury Povich, and for recording the voiceover for this entry in the 2023 Shacknews Hall of Fame. It's the perfect backdrop for everything. Really, that's why Guile's theme goes with everything might be the most accurate and applicable meme of all time. In the golden age of children's game shows such as Nickelodeon's Guts, Legends of the Hidden Temple, and Double Dare, Nick Arcade was something to appeal to all of the gamers among Nickelodeon's audience. Co-designed by James Bethia and Kareem Matif, and hosted by Phil Moore, it was easily one of the most intricate and interesting setups among Nick's live-action lineup. Players wouldn't just answer trivia questions, they would also engage in numerous video game challenges that utilized original games made for the show with chroma key technology of the time. A lot of kids sat at home dreaming of being on that set. We fantasized of suiting up and engaging in challenges like dodging coconut-throwing monkeys and angry toucans to get bananas, and dodging laser-shooting robots to turn off circuit breakers, all to win real cash and prizes. Nick Arcade even incorporated more popular video games from the market into its contest with the Wizards Challenge, renamed Experts Challenge after the first season. Here, players had mere seconds to beat a specific score or achieve a victory in a level. Meanwhile, the other team could wager on whether or not they'd be able to accomplish it. This part of the show was a portal into great games we may or may not have known about from platforms like the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, TurboGrafx-16, and Neo Geo. It was a great way to keep up with games that were coming out. Nick Arcade was so beloved that in 2015, James Bethia and Kareem Matif attempted a Kickstarter campaign to give it a spiritual successor. Unfortunately, it could not meet its funding goal. However, Nick Arcade still stays with us as one of the best among the greatest era of game shows, and perhaps one of the most formative looks at early video game focused competitions. The 90s were a colorful decade, and companies like Nintendo and Apple popularized combining translucency and color. That fusion gave us some of the more memorable plastic electronics of all times, from the atomic purple Nintendo 64 console, whose translucent control deck and controller let you see the inner workings, to iMac computers that added a dash of color to sterile white offices. The see-through fun didn't stop there. Companies manufactured colorful translucent televisions, telephones, mobile phones, and alarm clocks, just to name a few. But Nintendo was the most prolific. The company's N64 and Game Boy hardware came in nearly every color you could think of. And of course, many of the models were transparent to boot. It might seem like overkill today, but having lots of colorful and see-through choices was the way to let consumers express themselves through their devices. The clear craze was memorable enough to be included in retro roundups of the 90s fads, leaving many consumers wishing electronics of today had more variety.
Well, today, I'm incredibly pleased to introduce iMac, our consumer product.
The launch of the iMac was the beginning of Steve Jobs' plan to turn around Apple in 1998. Apple was in dire straits when the company acquired Next a year earlier. Jobs had been away from the company he co-founded with Steve Wozniak for over a decade, and iMac was the beginning of technology and design revolution inside Apple that birthed the iPod and many more successful products. iMac looked different. It featured translucent plastic casings, some decent built-in Wi-Fi I/O for peripheral devices, a keyboard that users could plug a mouse into, and yeah, The iMac sure did have a mouse. Branding became a core part of Apple's marketing campaigns for the better part of 20 years, leading up to the iPhone. In the late 1990s, Mac market share was in the dumps, and the release of a product like iMac that looked different and cost $12.99 brought new energy to the company's products. While the first iMac wasn't perfect, it began a shift in design at the company that created a group of loyal customers that appreciated the style and function of Apple products. Schools and colleges would have a couple of iMacs in their computer labs, and over time, people really seemed to like Apple products. There are probably more iPhones than people on Earth these days, but the Shacknews Hall of Fame Council remembers a time when Apple was the little guy. iMac kicked off a set of events that ultimately turned things around in an unprecedented path to becoming the largest company on Earth with a multi-trillion-dollar market capitalization. iMac is being inducted in its first year of eligibility as it represents a key moment in technology history. Welcome to Canton. F-Zero X blasted onto the N64 in 1998. The futuristic racing game was the sequel to the SNES launch title F-Zero, and added a whole slew of new machines, pilots, tracks, and songs. F-Zero X ran fast as well, pushing 60 frames per second on the N64 hardware. The game challenged players with multiple difficulty levels in a Grand Prix mode, and a brand new Death Race mode that really kicked things up a notch. F-Zero X is one of the finest racing games to ever be released, and was one of many great N64 games, deserving the high praise of being inducted into the Shacknews Hall of Fame in its first year of eligibility. Canton's got boost power now. GeoCities launched in the mid-1990s as Beverly Hills Internet (BHI). The platform was built to be a series of online communities that had all sorts of topics. Users were able to express themselves with their own website, and it was one of the first places on the internet to feature sweet animated GIFs. GeoCities was acquired by Yahoo in 1999 as the first tech bubble ramped up. By the year 2001, the economics of GeoCities led to data transfer limits being implemented. GeoCities was shut down in the United States in 2009, but survived overseas until 2018. There have been countless attempts to archive the internet magic of the original platform, but it will remain hard to recreate the lightning in a bottle that was GeoCities in 1990. Lycos began as a Carnegie Mellon University research project in 1994, launching as a company a year later. The search engine pivoted to web publishing with acquisitions from Tripod.com and AngelFire.com. The combined entity created some of the services like Lycos Mail and Lycos Domains, and surprisingly still exist. The company's own overview page says diversification has been the key to survival. The integration of various products, services, and brands provided to Lycos users for the last 25 years. Launched as a meta search engine in 1995, Metacrawler combines search results from Google, Ask, Yahoo, About, and all sorts of other search engine sites. Metacrawler saw tremendous user growth and ended up selling to another internet startup, which was then bought by another internet startup, as was custom with the times. Metacrawler is currently owned by System1 and relaunched as its own search engine in 2017. The Ask Jeeves search engine launched in the summer of 1997. It was the first search engine to create a butler guide to represent itself. The company ended up being acquired by IAC in 2005, and ended up being branded to Ask in 2006. The search engine officially shut down in 2010, and Ask attempted to grow by acquiring other sites in 2008. Ask.com is too good of a URL, so we look forward to many more years of pivots by IAC. Ask is still running at the time of its Shacknews Hall of Fame induction, but Jeeves is nowhere to be seen. This website was created by Wired's Hotwired online division and pivoted users with search results originally powered by the Inktomi database. Hotbot claimed to index sites faster than its competitors when it launched. Hotbot was acquired by Lycos in 1998, and things went about as well as two Google competitors merging would. Lycos ultimately sold Hotbot.com in 2016, and it's been sold twice since then. It's tough on the internet streets. One of the first free email websites, Hotmail really took the world by storm when it launched in 1996. Microsoft acquired the company just a year later, renaming it MSN Hotmail, and then combining it in Windows Live in 2005. Hotmail users were notified in 2011 that Microsoft was beginning to phase out the email service. Hotmail.com was officially discontinued in 2013. Hotmail accounts live on as Outlook accounts after the Great Migration of 2013. Hey folks, if you enjoyed the Shacknews Hall of Fame, be sure to hit that like, subscribe, and notification button. It's 3 small clicks for you, but means the world to us. For more video features and everything else gaming related, you're already in the right place. You're on Shacknews.com.